Jesus commands us to love our enemies. What if he was actually serious? A few days ago, we saw the worst attack on American soil since 9/11. It was also the worst mass shooting in American history. A man armed with an assault rifle and motivated by some combination of homophobia, Islamic extremism, and maybe even mental illness, entered a gay nightclub in Orlando and killed 49 people. For those of you looking for a tangible way to help the victims and their families beyond just prayer, I'm going to put a link at the bottom of this video with more information about churches, nonprofit organizations, and others who are reaching out to that community and helping as much as possible. I encourage you to click there and find a way that you can help. These kinds of attacks are becoming unnervingly common. Jihadist propaganda on social media has made it possible for people to self-radicalize. And when that's combined with very accessible military-grade weapons, the outcome is both lethal and sadly predictable. Also predictable is the fear that infects the country after these sorts of attacks. This fear is often broadly aimed at all Muslims. As he did after the shooting in San Bernardino last December, Mr. Trump has again called for a ban on all Muslims entering the United States. He seems to ignore the fact that one of the shooters in San Bernardino, as well as the attacker in Orlando, were both born and raised in the U.S. They were not immigrants. They were American citizens. But when people are afraid, they don't care about facts. They will grasp onto anyone promising to keep them safe, even if their ideas lack both evidence and common sense. We don't make good rational decisions when we are afraid. Simply put, fear makes us dumb. And leaders without any virtue will exploit that fact. Unfortunately, Christians are just as susceptible to this fear-mongering as everyone else. Let me give you an example. Back in 2009, a Muslim group proposed building an Islamic community center about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center site. The media began calling it the Ground Zero Mosque, and people absolutely lost their minds about it. One prominent Christian leader said that if it was built, it would be a beachhead for Sharia law throughout the United States. Newt Gingrich said that the Ground Zero Mosque was part of an Islamist cultural political offensive designed to undermine and destroy our civilization. Fearful Christians were mobilized across the country to stop the project, and opportunistic politicians used the story to scare Christians into the voting booth during the 2010 midterm elections. And in large part, it worked. Amid all of the outrage and the fear, few people slowed down to ask some important questions. For example, how exactly would the construction of a mosque in Lower Manhattan impose Sharia law throughout the country? Here's another one. If Christians mobilized to pass laws preventing the construction of a mosque, could those same laws be used in the future to stop the construction of churches? Or how about this one? How has the American Republic managed to survive, given that there's been another mosque just blocks from Ground Zero for over 30 years? People didn't ask those questions because fear makes us dumb, and demagogues thrive on dumb. Now, I don't want to be dumb. I'm sure you don't want to be dumb either. But after the Orlando attack, there's a real chance that we could succumb to fear again. So let's reason together. What is a thoughtful Christian response to our Muslim neighbors? Rather than paranoia or irrational calls to ban all Muslims, I want to suggest that Christians are actually called to love and even defend them. Let me give you 3 reasons. First, Jesus calls us to love our Muslim neighbors, not merely other Christians. He told the parable of the Good Samaritan in response to the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Jews and Samaritans at the time, very much like Christians and Muslims, had fundamental disagreements about religion. But Jesus said that those disagreements were no excuse for not loving one another. We aren't called to merely love those who agree with us. Anyone can do that. The kind of love that comes from God embraces even those who oppose us. Whether you see Muslims as your neighbors or as your enemies is ultimately irrelevant if you are a Christian. Our posture toward them is to be the same as God's. We are to love them. That's why the anti-Muslim rhetoric from some religious and political leaders who claim to be Christians is so troubling. They want to inflate your fears toward Muslims, and if you're afraid of them, you are going to find it impossible to love them. As Henry Nouwen said, fear engenders fear. It never gives birth to love. Let me say it more clearly. any Christian leader provoking your fears is not leading you by the Spirit of Christ. They are, to use a biblical but loaded term, antichrists. As the Apostle Paul said, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love, a spirit that gives us the power to love even our enemies. Second, the mission of Christ is hurt, not helped, by demonizing Muslims. I believe the gospel of Jesus Christ can stand on its own merit in the free market of ideas without having to ban, silence, or in some way misrepresent people of other faiths. When Christians highlight nut job jihadists as somehow representative of all Muslims, and they use this as a way of making Christianity seem superior, what they're really doing is displaying their lack of confidence in Christ's gospel. They don't think it's beautiful or compelling enough on its own to win hearts and minds. So instead, they emphasize the worst elements of other faiths. That's a game I don't want to play. Heaven knows Christianity has some pretty awful skeletons in its history closet as well. And if we want to have a showdown between the worst elements of Islam and the worst expressions of Christianity, count me out. Third, Christians should defend Muslims because Christian faith always thrives where all faiths are free. I believe that James Madison did a great favor to the Christian faith when he penned the First Amendment. He understood that in order for true religion to thrive, for people to have their affections turned toward God in a genuine way, they needed freedom. Freedom from any state coercion, freedom of conscience, freedom of practice, freedom of speech, freedom to accept a religion or reject it. When religion is mandated or in some way regulated by the state, it ends up inoculating people from the true power of the gospel. So because of that, I want to live in a society where Muslims enjoy every freedom to believe, think, and practice and promote their faith, because only in that kind of a society will I be free, will all Christians be free to do the same. Sadly, there are some Christians, like Gerald Harris, the editor of the Christian Index, who want to exclude Muslims from freedom of religion rights, and there are many others who are supporting Donald Trump's call to ban Muslims from the U.S. Such ideas are not only unconstitutional, they're unchristian. And they are, in a word, dumb. In the wake of this horrible tragedy in Orlando, let's not give in to fear. Let's not become dumb. Let's think rationally, biblically, about how we are to respond. Let's not listen or give more of a platform to the demagogues in politics or even those in the church. Instead, let's choose to follow the way of Christ. Engage your Muslim neighbors, love them, listen to them, and yes, even defend them. As Christians, we cannot demand that everyone share our beliefs, but we can demand that everyone share our freedoms. For a deeper look at how Christians can engage their culture without fear or anger, I encourage you to check out my new ebook, The Voting Booth, a new vision for Christian engagement in a post-Christian culture. I wrote this because we're in such a confusing election season with so many crazy ideas out there about Christians either completely withdrawing from the culture or aggressively trying to take it over through politics or other means. And I wanted to offer a third alternative, a different way of thinking about how to engage the culture. The book was just released. It's now available on Amazon for download for, I think, just $4.99. So check it out and help me spread the word about it. Also, don't forget about my weekly podcast with Phil Vischer. We talk about all these kinds of issues and many more in a Christian and sometimes funny way. And of course, you can get more of my content, articles, books, my devotional, and more videos at skyjethani.com.